there were particular quotes that you highlighted from your qualitative interviews, that one project manager said that if I don't have ambiguity in the project, it's difficult for me to wake up in the morning and go to work. One another PM said that if there is no ambiguity, there is no fun, right? So why do you think there is a tendency that project managers who fit in those ambiguity profiles want to embrace ambiguity instead of having sort of failing attitude towards ambiguity?
So in the past, there was a belief that we have certain traits that we hold, which are unchangeable. We are stuck with them. We can't change them. But the good news that even if you are not comfortable with ambiguity or one lacks tools to manage ambiguity effectively, the tolerance of ambiguity, it's a skill that can be learned through experience, through practice, through being reflective. We might be shy to ask questions of others, but then the practice could be to challenge ourselves to do that. We might use networks. We might surround ourselves with mentors, peers who can help us to make sense of ambiguous situations.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. So today we have with us Dr. Anna Wiewiora. Dr. Anna is Associate Professor at the Queensland University of Technology. Anna has researched multiple papers, especially on the topic related to the ambiguity in projects, which is what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Anna, thank you very much for joining with us today. If I start with your education background and your current role at the QUT as well.
Thank you, Mohammed. And it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. So as you mentioned, my institution is Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and I work at the QUT Business School. I'm both researching and teaching into project management. In my work, I'm fascinated at helping project managers navigate complex situations, paradoxes, and ambiguities. And ambiguities is the topic that we're going to talk about today. I also did some research on project learning and how projects learn from each other and how then parent organization can learn from projects. I interviewed project managers and a PMO for that research, but generally speaking, lots of my work is around the context of large-scale projects in sectors like infrastructure, mining, technology.
What motivated you to study ambiguity? Project management is a wide field. Why ambiguity? Why not any other topics?
I got interested in this topic of ambiguity because, well, let's face it, no matter how well we plan our projects are messy. There's a lot of ambiguities, unknown, perhaps lack of clarities. We often think of project management as being structured or process-driven, but in reality, a lot of work happens in that gray area where we don't know the path forward. It's not very clear. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm fascinated in unpacking those complexities of project work, things like paradoxical tensions that project managers experience when they face competing priorities, and also that work on ambiguity, where there is unclear situation. We don't know how to move forward with that. So how do we navigate that decision making?
So let's get a few definitions out of the way. Every project manager perhaps would define ambiguity in its own way, right? What's the definition of ambiguity in the practical terms?
Yeah, absolutely. Ambiguity is when things just aren't clear. It might be because we are facing information which is incomplete or vague, or situation, or someone shared information with us, but that is open to multiple interpretations. Let me give you an example. You might be in a meeting and you might realize that you don't actually know who is the key decision maker. Or maybe there are team responsibilities, but it is unclear who does what. So that's when the ambiguity takes place.
I also quite like in the paper where you mentioned there is a close relative of ambiguity, which you call uncertainty as well, right? Which is something, at least in my experience, we use less at the term ambiguity and more uncertainty, right? So what's going on with the uncertainty and with the term ambiguity?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. And my colleague, Professor Peter O'Connor, with whom I did this research, and we struggled with that as well. So we spent probably countless of hours trying to unpack and understand the differences, because we felt that there is a subtle difference. So the way how I can explain that is these two, ambiguity and uncertainty, are closely linked, but there are subtle differences between them. Uncertainty is when we are unsure about the outcome of the situation. So, for example, you can estimate probabilities and likelihoods based on past experiences and data to give you some more information about that and try to address that uncertainty. So let me give you an example in the context of renewable energy project. Say you are waiting for solar panels from overseas supplier. You know that delays could happen due to supply chain issues, but you can't predict exactly when or if the panels will arrive on time. So this is uncertainty. And uncertainty is directly linked to risk and risk management. Whereas with ambiguity, on the other hand, ambiguity happens when there is a lack of clarity about the situation itself. So maybe we are dealing with information which is incomplete or vague. So I give you another example. It might be unclear when you are at the meeting, it might be unclear who the decision makers are. Yeah, like I've mentioned earlier. Or there might be unclear role responsibilities. And why is it important to know the difference? Is because we need to deal with uncertainties differently than we need to deal with ambiguities. Before I dive into that, maybe one more thing that I want to tell you a little bit more about is how those two are linked. So ambiguity might lead to uncertainty. Say when the instructions are vague, you can interpret them in multiple ways. You will naturally feel uncertain about how to move forward. So that's how these two are linked. For uncertainty, we suggest to employ risk management techniques, gather more data, maybe use probabilistic models to forecast possible outcomes. But for ambiguity, the key is to improve clarity of the situation. And that can be done through stakeholder management or engagement with stakeholders, fostering environment where we encourage question, encourage open discussion, use networks, have frequent meetings with our teams to clarify that situation. So it's a different set of skills and strategies to deal with ambiguity.
Before we dive into the findings of the paper, and I want to start with the data collection part as well. If I understand correctly, for this specific paper which you published in 2022, I think, so there were two studies you did. One study which was more of in the form of survey. I think you surveyed around 300 plus PMs. And then the second study was more of a qualitative interviews, which you did, right? 18 interviews, right? Like this seems to be quite a significant amount of data to study ambiguity, right? Perhaps if you can give us what was the reason of going into such depth and collecting such vast amounts of data.
So it is quite common when we do research to use mixed methods using qualitative and quantitative data, and that helps to strengthen the findings. We use quantitative data, so we surveyed 300 project managers to find different types of ambiguities. We then categorize them. That was very useful to understand what the ambiguity is, what type of ambiguities do project managers experience. But with then qualitative study, it helped us to explore and learn more about how they deal with those ambiguous situations, how they navigate environment where there is lack of clarity in their project work. We learned a lot of examples and rich data from those qualitative studies. That's why we use both.
In order to frame your findings, you use this framework called tolerance of ambiguity framework. Perhaps for the viewers, if you can give us a brief glimpse of why this framework was used and what's going on inside this framework.
This framework came from a work that my collaborator, my colleague Peter, did on tolerance of ambiguity. Based on that framework, tolerance of ambiguity have 3 dimensions. One is the comfort with ambiguity. So to translate that to practice, it's around how well we remain calm and composed when we face with ambiguity. So we feel comfortable with it if we face ambiguity. The second one is desire for challenging work. So the question here is, do you seek out novelty and challenge in your work as an opportunity for growth? Is that ambiguity something that you desire? or you prefer or you rather shy away from those situations. And the third component of the framework is managing uncertainty. So how effective you are in managing ambiguity or uncertainty in your project. So why these three dimensions are important? Because some project managers might be very comfortable with ambiguity. They might be very calm and composed when they face it, but they might not have enough tools to be able to manage it effectively. Yes? So they might have high level of comfort, but lack of skills to manage it effectively. On the other hand, some might be not comfortable with ambiguity, might try to avoid ambiguity, but every time they face ambiguous situation, they know exactly what to do. They thrive in those situations. Yes, so others might be very excited about situations which are complex, that kind of helps them to wake up every day, because that challenging work is something that motivates them to move forward. So there can be different profiles, and understanding those ambiguity profiles can help us develop strategies to strengthen our weak areas and improve those weak areas, whether it's improve our comfort, desire, or learn about the strategies to better manage ambiguity.
So if I understand correctly, the TOA was essentially used as a lens to drive to the conclusions and come up with the ambiguity profile for different project managers, right?
Absolutely. So this is the part of the questionnaire that we deployed and asked project managers. Each element, each dimension, so the comfort with ambiguity, desire for challenging work, and managing ambiguity, each of these dimensions have maybe 5 or 6 questions that we ask to assess the profile of project managers. So after taking that survey, you will learn whether you are high in comfort or high or low in desire for challenging work, or high or low in managing uncertainty. And knowing your profile, say if you are low in comfort, now what to do, what are the strategies to help you embrace that comfort with ambiguity, to help you stay calm and composed rather than stressed and frustrated.
So we talked about the data collection. We also talk about the research framework that you also use to review your findings as well. Project managers tend to be more comfortable with the task related ambiguity than the people related ambiguity, right? To me, at least, when I have a certain task to be done, I tend to deal with it in a more easier way, but there is a sense of hesitation to navigate ambiguity, especially when it comes to people. Why do you think that is?
First of all, it's great to hear that you can relate with that finding as well. So I really like to see that the research we do in fact applies to practice, and I'm glad to hear that was the case. So that was very interesting insight that came out from our study. We've learned that project managers love tackling complex tasks. Like you said, those more related to the technical aspects, like engineering challenges, maybe scheduling unknowns. And these are the problems with solutions. But the people-related ambiguities tend to trigger more frustration and stress. And why is that? Because they are less straightforward to handle. For example, issues with unclear roles or how to align stakeholders' conflicting interests. These situations can be quite stressful. Let's say one stakeholder focuses on cost, other prioritizes environmental impact, yet another one wants higher quality. And we face that ambiguity. What do we do? There is lack of clarity in even moving forward with this. People are generally less predictable than technical challenges. That's why those situations are more messy and perhaps more difficult to address. And often when we face people-related ambiguities, there is often no right answer when dealing with that, and we have to employ things like emotional intelligence and communication skills, those soft skills which are important and necessary to deal with people-related ambiguities.
There was also one other thing in the study. We found that generally PM success is more linked to the soft skills than to the technical skills which you mentioned about. But then we also see that in the current trends of the of the recruitment market as well, that when you want to hire a project manager, there is more tendency towards like evaluation of the soft skills than the hard skills. The idea that the project managers is going to sit on a Microsoft project few hours on daily basis, it's very rare. Project managers essentially are either trying to convince people or either trying to help people, right? So it's more of a communication on day-to-day basis. Do you think that this is a trend that will remain, or this is a trend that has recently come up because of the nature of the complexity of the projects?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And I think that was always the case. However, we didn't have tools and strategies and methodologies that will help project managers understand and navigate and perhaps equip project managers with those soft skills. There is research who found that around 90% of time project managers spend on communicating, and it can be verbal and different sorts of communications and dealing with people. Essentially, soft skills are very important. Of course, when I teach project management, I tell to my students that project management is like yin and yang. You need soft skills and you need technical skills. But now we know that having only technical skills is not enough. And our study also found that project managers are more successful when they know how to handle ambiguity, which is essentially a soft skill. One thing I'd like to highlight that also informed our study is a work by Ralph Muller and Rodney Turner. I think that work is from 2010. They had studied about competencies of successful project managers. And their study found that successful project managers require emotional, intellectual, and managerial skills. And these are essentially very much soft skills. So qualities like critical thinking, empathy, communication skills, leadership skills. These are the ones that differentiated very successful project managers from others. So I just want to link that to ambiguity. Again, these are the situations where project managers need to make decisions with incomplete or unclear information. So that requires using soft skills like engaging stakeholders to gain clarity, turning to your networks, being good listeners, being good in communication. So these are the soft skills required also to manage ambiguity.
There were particular quotes that you highlighted from your qualitative interviews, that one project manager said that if I don't have ambiguity in the project, it's difficult for me to wake up in the morning and go to work. One another PM said that if there is no ambiguity, there is no fun, right? So why do you think there is a general tendency that project managers who fit in those ambiguity profiles want to embrace ambiguity instead of having sort of fearing attitude towards ambiguity?
To answer that question, I'd like to highlight the difference between personality traits and personality states. So that's a little bit of research into psychology. So in the past, there was a belief that we have certain traits that we hold, which are unchangeable. We are stuck with them. We can't change them. For example, tolerance of ambiguity. But the good news that even if you are not comfortable with ambiguity or one lacks tools to manage ambiguity effectively, the tolerance of ambiguity, it's a skill that can be learned. And like you notice that some people naturally handle ambiguity better than others. Someone might always stay calm when dealing with unclear, messy, complex situation. They would know what to do. But some project managers might fear ambiguity, mostly because it feels like losing control. We don't have that clarity. And then there's the theory in psychology research called whole trait theory. And that theory tells us that our personalities are not just fixed. We have certain traits. Maybe we might be more extroverted. We might be more or less willing or happy to engage with ambiguous situations. But we can also train ourselves to act more. Let's say if we are highly introverted, we can train ourselves and we want to become or be perceived as more extroverted. We can train ourselves, model behavior. Therefore, we are able to display the extroversion behavior. The same with the tolerance of ambiguity. If we tend to fear ambiguity. The good news is that we can learn that skill. We can do this through experience, through practice, through being reflective about how we are, what we lack, and try to change that. Perhaps challenge ourselves. Go out there in terms of embracing situations where there is lack of clarity. Maybe we might be shy to ask questions of others, but then the practice could be to challenge ourselves to do that. We might use networks. We might surround ourselves with mentors, peers who can help us to make sense of ambiguous situations. So there are different tools that we can do to learn and become more comfortable and more effective, essentially, in managing ambiguity.
So I work for a large organization. Embracing is one part, but there's also navigating ambiguity in such a large organization, which is, let's say, 30,000 people, plenty of business unit functions. You mentioned that PMs will go around and leverage their internal networks to navigate ambiguity, right? And then you also mentioned about the leadership support as well. Internal networks comes with long-standing experience, but if you are someone new, you will potentially count on the leadership support to leverage on their networks, right? And this is not just on the personality trait. This is something how the organizations are built, right? Is this the only way that the PMs can navigate ambiguity working for large organizations?
This is a great question, and I'd like to unpack a little bit more the two that you've already mentioned before I move on to a couple of other suggestions. So the two things that you've mentioned is seeking advice from our own networks, but you also said someone might be new in the organization. So perhaps the second very good advice or strategy to apply is to turning to senior leaders for help. And many do that and use their own networks. But we don't want to, of course, go to someone who we know is not willing to help. So we really want leaders who encourage that open discussion, offer constructive feedback, and help project managers getting unstuck with ambiguity. We as project managers can ourselves embrace that environment as well, even by holding during the team meetings, being open to perspectives from others, putting challenges out there for everyone to hear and getting input from them, inviting different subject matter experts to get information from them. So the communication is a key. A lot of ambiguity stems from a lack of communication, and this is where organizational culture plays a key role. So culture that promotes psychological safety, where people feel safe to speak up without a fear of being blamed, or culture that supports open discussion, where everyone can ask questions, where we feel comfortable to say, I don't know, or can you explain? This is not clear to me. I would like to know more. This culture values knowledge sharing rather than expecting everyone to know all the answers. And leaders can play a crucial role in shaping that culture by modeling certain behavior, being open to different perspectives, creating an environment where employees feel safe to voice their concerns and ask questions. And this is where lots of those ambiguities can be lifted. Another thing to mention that is important in managing ambiguity is to leveraging our internal networks. So when teams communicate effectively, and often in the larger projects like the one that you manage, you will work in multidisciplinary teams. People that might be located in different parts of the organizations, or maybe even different locations. There might be people with different schedules or different backgrounds. You might be dealing with environmental specialists, but also engineers, procurement people. So again, it is important to stay open and listen to people's different perspectives, being transparent during meetings, involve subject matter experts. When there's a situation that we feel it's unclear, we don't know how to move forward, rather than trying to deal ourselves with that situation, draw from those networks, draw from those multidisciplinary experts to help us navigate and clarify that ambiguity. That is very important in helping to lift out that ambiguity.
Most of the audience that are listening to are project managers, or let's say want to become project managers in the future. So if you can give us one practical takeaway to manage ambiguity in the best possible way.
My advice would be to build your network before you need it. So when we face ambiguity, having strong internal and external network make all the difference. Whether these are mentors, industry contacts, communities of practice, or key stakeholders, knowing who to ask for help with addressing ambiguities and can help us make more effective decisions where we have more clarity of the situation, of the information. So building those trusting and strong relationships is the best tool for making sense of ambiguous situations. Of course, those take time. That's why I suggest we build those networks before we even need them.
Dr. Anna, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to collaborate for your future research papers to be published in the Project Management Journal. Thank you again for the opportunity, and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks.